Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the 13.10 patch notes. This is the mid-season update, so there are some pretty big changes, and I do want to say this is going to be coming from the perspective of a challenger, support main, and coach. These are going to have my opinions and my feel on the changes. If you want stats and efficiency and numbers breakdown, I recommend you check out Freak's video on this. Now, the way that they laid out their changes is really horrible, so what I am going to do is I'm going to start it off with enchanters, and talk about their mythics and then their legendary changes, and then I'm going to move on to the engagers and wardens. Okay, so for enchanters, I'm going to generalize the changes. So in general, their items are cheaper, ability haste is very hard to come by, there are slightly stronger item effects, faster spikes, less base stats, and there is a new system of scaling off of mana regen. Now for the first big change, this is Echoes of Helia. This is a new mythic that has been added into the game. In a way, it's a mix of Old Moonstone and Mandate, where dealing damage rewards you as an enchanter. So you deal damage to store up to 2 shards, and then you enchant an ally to heal them and deal some nearby damage to enemies. It is worth noting that there is 5 less ability haste than the other mythics for enchanters. It provides scaling options and uptime, as it has dissonance to scale mana regen into AP in the mid to late game. And it also has no internal cooldown on dealing the damage and healing your allies, so it can proc a lot of times in team fights with the right setup. Now the wording isn't the most clear on this item, and I have tested this out. There aren't great visuals for the damage proc either, you can see the heal, but in terms of the damage that it does to the nearest enemy champion once you enchant an ally, I believe that the nearest enemy champion is towards your ally, not to yourself, and so if you are Soraka and you ult your teammate in the top lane and they're in a fight, that could deal that damage portion to the enemy, so that's worth keeping in mind. Echoes of Helia builds out of the Chalice of Blessing, which is a new item component. This gives you health and mana regen, so it's great for staying power in lane, almost like a mini ocean dragon. It's great for the War of Attrition, but these stats won't be relevant in skirmishes or out of lane as much. And so this is going to be great in range versus range lanes or in laning phases that are really extended. Personally, for myself, I don't think this is going to be the greatest item because I'm roaming around a lot. Game pace is a lot faster in Challenger, but I can see this being really good in other elos. And now what happens to this is its unique passive of Harmony becomes Dissonance when it's upgraded into the Echoes of Helia, which then instead gives AP for base mana regen instead of the health regen, as we can see here. Okay, so back to the Echoes of Helia. Champions that I immediately picture using this item well is going to be Karma and Soraka. They are both strong in lane. Karma is the War of Attrition queen. She can shove, poke, pressure, dominate 2v2 really hard, and enjoys extended laning phases. Soraka would love the HP regen that the Chalice of Harmony gives early on, and potentially with that global extra heal and damage with your ult. Now Sona, she can proc the damage component easily, and this Echoes of Helia item, it's not necessarily just an early game item. It has no internal cooldown, it scales its damage, it's going to be potentially very strong on Sona as she can proc it so easily. Nami, potentially adding huge damage alongside her mandate, so her 2-item spike might be quite overwhelming. There is word of it being strong on champions that can abuse Font of Life as well. So Ashe is the #1 champion that comes to mind for this. You can auto attack, do damage, apply that slow, and then heal your allies with that Font of Life, and then just get absurd numbers on this item. The last champion I'm going to suggest for this strategy is Bard, as he can also apply slow with his autos when he has his meeps, and he likes going into the Resolve tree and taking Font of Life. So Echoes of Helia, it seems like quite a strong item. I will need to test it out properly. I have tested it out a little bit. The numbers haven't been insane. I think not being able to see the damage procs kind of makes the item feel a little bit worse, but let me know your thoughts if you have tried it out yourself. Moving on to Moonstone Renewer, this got cheaper, as did all of the support mythics, and its effect got changed. So now healing or shielding an ally changed to the nearest allied champion, excluding yourself, and this is nearest to the allied champion that you are enchanting. And it heals or shields on a percentage of what you initially did to them. So this is going to be a more intuitive item. Before you had to like stay in combat and it was a little bit awkward or not the most intuitive mechanic. This seems like a pretty strong item. It's going to have great uptime. It can give a lot of values in team fights and even in small skirmishes. And again, it doesn't have any long internal cooldown, but there is only going to be 1 bounce. And so there are 2 ways that we can approach this item. Either you can just completely ignore it and just trust that it's going to stack up some numbers, or we can do some positional optimizations. Because what's going to happen is the ally that you enchant, the nearest ally to them is going to get the buffs. And of course, if there are no nearby allies, then that one ally that you are enchanting is going to get the buffs themselves. So in terms of positional optimizations, let's picture supports with AoE shields like Karma or Seraphine or Sona. If you're shielding the whole team, but you're closest to your backline, then the bounce value will be on the backline. So the ally that it chooses to chain off of is nearest to you. And then the ally that chain bounces to is nearest to the ally you enchanted. So without overcomplicating this too much, let's picture that you have 2 frontline allies, 2 backline allies. You're somewhere in the middle. If you stand towards your backline and then use your AoE heal or shield, it's going to apply towards your backline, right? If you apply it to your frontline, then it's going to be to your frontline. And sometimes you're going to want to keep this in mind. So for intuition's sake, be close to where you want the maximum enchanting value. Now this item seems the best when it's hard to deal damage, but with the Echoes of Helia rewarding doing damage, this item you don't need to do any damage at all. And this is going to be the case either when you verse a lot of threat and it's really dangerous for you to do damage or to be near your front line and you need to hang back, or your champion struggles to consistently deal damage. For example, Janna, and again there is no internal cooldown, so both Janna's E and R will proc it, etc. Okay, and then Chevaliers, it is practically the same item, just a little bit cheaper with a little bit less value in terms of stats, and its active is going to give 5% less bonus movement speed, which is relevant, but it's still going to be a solid item. Moving on to legendary items for enchanters, and so the biggest change is going to be Mikhail's Blessing, in my opinion. It went from an item with pretty horrible stats. It gave magic resistance with no HP, not really sure which type of champion would want to build that, and now it gives HP and HP regen from the passive of Harmony because it builds out of Chalice of Harmony. It also has a bit of a stronger heal later on. And so this is definitely a buff for the item. I didn't like it on Thresh previously, even though all the pros built it, but now it's much better on him as he can enjoy both the HP and the HP regen. Bard would also start considering this item, and it's going to be more splashable on Enchanters too, with the HP and with the Harmony. Okay, moving on to Redemption. Now this was the most splashable second item for supports in my opinion. Its active is very useful in chaotic game paces, and it gave 20 ability haste, but now it lost that 20 ability haste. That hurts, but pretty much all the legendary items did, so that's whatever. It gives a little bit more health, which is great for those half enchanted champions like Bard and Thresh, and it is now 200 gold more expensive than the legendary item alternatives. It didn't get changed, but all the others did get a lot cheaper. So it's going to be less of a permanent second item now. It's still going to be strong, but I would imagine this as a third item. So then it also has more mana regen to scale off of its Harmony passive. Now for Ardent Sensor, this got 200 gold cheaper. It is now building out of the Ether Wisp so that it gives you move speed as well. And its item effect gives you a little bit more attack speed and damage on hit early on for you and your ally. So being cheaper, giving you move speed, stronger item effect, I think this item is going to be built a lot more now. Now for Staff of Flowing Water, very similar changes. 200 gold cheaper, building out of Ether Wisp, giving you that move speed and a stronger item effect early on. Ardent and Staff seem the best bet for second items now, given that you can use their effects well. Of course, their effects are somewhat situational. And so if you see a situation where Ardent is looking good, like where your allies like to attack a lot and have attack speed, this is going to mainly come from the jungle and ADC role. Just be on the lookout for that. Staff of Water, this is going to be a little bit more splashable, a little bit more fluid, but if you see allies with decent AP ratios, or if you have a couple AP champions on your team, then this is going to be the best situation for Staff. And so the build path that I'm imagining for enchanters on this patch is going to be typically Mikhail's, and then Ardent or Staff, depending on which one looks best, and then Redemption or Mikhail's, depending on which one looks best. Moving on to Chemtech Putrefier. So this is going to be up in relative value, as it kept its ability haste, where most of the other legendary items lost all of their ability haste, and it is also 200 gold cheaper, so it should be considered situationally a little bit more often now. Remember that it is any type of damage that procs it, so it could be your auto attacks or it could be your magic damage. I'm still not a fan of this item's design, but keeping its ability haste and it being cheaper should definitely be considered when the enemy team has significant healing. Moving on to Mandate, so this is the item that was mythic and moved down to legendary to make space for the Echoes of Helia. The cost is down. It doesn't give you health anymore. It gives you a little bit more AP, and its effect is going to be a little bit weaker early on, which is reasonable because now it's only a legendary item. But it losing its health component was really tough because giving health to supports was just such a great stat. And so now it's going to be hard to rush this item. It's tricky for supports to have absolutely no health from their items at all. However, it did keep its ability haste, so this is important to note because that is in such high demand for legendary items now. And so I think Mandate should be considerations as a second item for Bard and Nami and Thresh. These are the first champions that come to mind. Maybe you can try it out as a first item on Nami, but I think that maybe Helia would be the better rush. For Bard, I think lock it into Mandate is going to feel pretty good as long as you feel like you don't need tanky stats for him. But he will be able to do a lot of damage with that. And then for Thresh, so as the only Mandate Thresh player in the world, I may make Mandate my splashable second item and go something like lock it into Mandate into Redemption. I don't think I would go Chevalier's into Mandate. I think you would be far too squishy with that build path. So I'm just going to play around a little bit there. But it's cool, we get some options to play around with this item as a legendary now. Moving on to the changes for the melee supports, or the engagers and the wardens, whatever you want to call it. In general, there is finally a decent magic resist item for supports to take. They are also cheaper across the board in terms of itemization, and there is a new component that gives health, armor, and a little bit of ability haste that is going to build into a lot of the tanky support items. Now, in terms of mythics, there aren't too many big changes. The Even Shroud and Locket are going to be building out of the Lifewell Pendant instead of the Kindle Gem, and it's also going to have their costs reduced, and also Locket has a little bit of a stronger shield at all stages of the game. Now, it did feel a little bit tricky to sit on the Aegis of Legion. It's quite an expensive item to build for supports, and so this is going to help out with the build path, Lifewell Pendant and Null Magic for Locket and for Even Shroud. Obviously being a bit more affordable is great. Now, the first big change for Mythics is going to be Radiant Virtue, once again being an affordable option for supports. It is still going to be the most expensive Mythic by far, but it is going to be relatively affordable at 2,700 gold. It's just going to get a little bit less stats in terms of health, in terms of ability haste, only giving 10. Whereas Locket and Even Shroud are going to remain with that 20 ability haste. And so all in all, Radiant Virtue is going to be a pretty solid option for these melee supports if they have the gold to afford it. The AoE heal is always going to be nice. Champions that I can picture using Radiant, this is going to be mainly the champions that were using the item before it got nerfed so heavily. And so I could imagine Braum, Taric, Thresh, Rel, maybe Alistair, maybe Amumu, these types of melee supports, getting quite good value out of it if you're snowballing. Moving on to the legendary items for the melee support. So Abyssal Mask, this is the solid magic resist item. It is finally here. It was so hard to be able to build magic resist as a support and give good stats and be affordable. So here it is. It has a useful passive. It builds out of Kindle Gem as well, and this is a rare commodity nowadays to be able to build Kindle Gem into another item. Kindle Gem has always been a fantastic item, a component just to build on supports, melee and ranged alike. So its health got hit, its magic resist got buffed, and so this is obviously going to be a situational item when you can have a lot of value out of the magic resist, and also when the unmake, the reducing of the magic resist of enemies, is going to be valuable for your teammates. This has been a long time coming. What you would normally do versus magic resist is just stack health and hope for the best. So this is a great change. Now moving on to Knight's Vow, this is going to build out of the Lifewell Pendant and no more Kindle Gem in the build order. A little bit cheaper, a little bit less stats, and the unique passive is going to do a little bit more damage to you. It's going to be pre-mitigation instead of post-mitigation. We don't really need to worry about that at all. That is never really going to be an issue. And it gives armor now because that's what Lifewell Pendant brings to the table. So this is really good. This is going to make you feel a lot tankier on your second item. If you're building this item, then armor is going to be relevant. And we probably won't look to build this item if we reverse a lot of AP. We would look for the Abyssal Mask instead. 5 ability haste off does hurt, but if it was 10 off, then I would start to reconsider this item a little bit, but that's still a pretty solid option. Moving on to Zeke's Convergence, so a couple hundred gold off, a little bit less health, a little bit more armor, a little bit less ability haste, so just juggling the numbers a little bit. And the Kindle Gem has been replaced with that Lifewell Pendant. So I've never really been a fan of this item too much. I think Anathemas and Knight's Vow just have better stats. You know, the mana is not really a relevant stat to build on melee supports. It doesn't make you tankier, and oftentimes it can be quite clunky in terms of actually getting its active effect to deal significant amounts of damage. So I probably won't be building this item, but for any of those of you who do enjoy this item, here you go. It looks just a little bit more affordable, so that's cool. Now, with all of this talk about Lifewell Pendant, let's just have a quick look at it. It costs 1050 gold, so this is going to be significantly more expensive than the Kindle Gem, which hurts a little bit, but also cheaper than the Aegis of Legion, so building your Mythic is going to feel that little bit smoother. This is just going to be the component that you're going to be building into most of these support melee items. It is worth noting that Anathema's was totally unchanged, so it still builds out of that really valuable Kindle gem, and it still gives 20 ability haste, which is a big deal. So even though it had no changes, don't forget about that item. That's going to go up a little bit in terms of priority for melee supports if you can make use of its tenacity reduction. And of course, if you verse a fed carry, so that damage reduction is going to be handy. The last thing that we're going to be talking about in terms of item changes, so Wardstone, this is just an item that you're going to be building last now. It was OP, I said it in all of my champion guides, build it as soon as you can. It finally got nerfed as it was much needed to. There's no use sitting on this 1100 gold item anymore. Just finish your build and throw this in absolutely last. This should practically never be bought. I don't know the last time I've gone past, like 3 total items as an engager or a warden. But it gives you a little bit of mana regen now, and then the Vigilant Wardstone, you need to actually pay for this to upgrade. You need to invest 1200 more gold into it, and then it's going to have those stats, but again, this is not going to be worth dumping all of that money in if you don't have the rest of your items completed. Turns out I lied, there are a couple more item changes I'm going to talk about. So Lost Chapter for mage supports. This is going to be great for low elo because that's where mages should typically be played. For extended laning phases, this is going to be nice because that's when Lost Chapter is going to be the most relevant in terms of sustaining mana, and it's going to be more affordable. What mages can also consider is going Mythic into Rylays into Mandate third item, or Rylays into Mythic into Mandate third item, depending on which build path is best for the mage that you're playing. Affordable items for mages are rare. This is going to be quite a lot of AP as well, and there's going to be a lot of damage alongside your Mythic. Now, the last support that I'm going to talk about is Pike, and he is very unique, so he's just going to get his own little description over here. And so Duskblade, this has been changed, and so now you're going to deal bonus damage based on the target's missing health, instead of empowering your next basic auto attack, and then you're still going to get that reset. The mechanics of the reset invisibility has just changed a little bit, but it's practically functionally the same. The bonus damage is not really going to be relevant for Pike, because you're just looking to find picks and you're looking to execute with your ult anyway. But the saddest thing for Pike is Prowler's getting moved from Mythic to Legendary and losing its Sand Swipe active, and that was so important to be able to make your E a point and click stun by jumping forwards and then moving through them with the active. Now, after you use dashes, blinks, or extinct stealth, you're going to deal a little bit of extra damage on your next attack, which is fine, but we're going to have to think about our build path now, because we're not going to be rushing this item anymore. And that brings us to Youmuu's Ghostblade. So this item got 100 gold more expensive, it got more stats, and it is just absurdly broken in my opinion. I do need to test it out a little bit more thoroughly, but it got more move speed with its active, and now you get move speed that stacks up to 40, and you get lethality based on the stacks when you're roaming around, which is insane for Pike. He is by far the best champion in the game that scales off of lethality. And he is comfortable sitting on those stacks, not constantly looking for poke either. So this is an item that is practically made for Pike. This is going to feel really, really good on him. And so in terms of the Pike build order, what I think it should look like now is Umbral Glaive into Youmuu's into situational lethality items. I think Axiom is still a fantastic item for Pike. It has great stats. I think Edge of Night is fantastic when the shields really denies what the enemy team wants to do in terms of finding a pick. Otherwise, Prowlers is going to be a decent option if none of the above apply. Now for some systematic game changes that is actually going to influence support. And this is something that I've been advocating for a while. I think if they want to make meaningful changes, they should really target systems instead of just numbers of champions and items. But anyway, we're going to start off with the relatively small changes. Fountain mana regen, so you're going to regen your mana faster. This is not going to change any decisions that you make. You're just going to have more tempo than usual. It's going to feel good. And the home guard timer, same thing. It's going to feel good. It's not really going to change your decisions, except if you can delay your base until 14 minutes instead of like 13:50 or something, then that's something to keep in mind. But you're going to have more tempo. You're going to be around on the map a little bit faster. The blast cones got delayed. That isn't really going to be too relevant. And then the big change in terms of minions. And so now what happens for the first 14 minutes of the game, the side lane minions are going to speed up so that mid and side waves crash first. And this is a huge deal for support, because what you used to do is you would crash a bot wave and then you would base and then you could roam mid. And then while the side waves are still moving along, the mid wave would crash. You can impact around mid on that window, and then you could move back bot in time to, hold that stacking crashed wave so that you can keep the pressure. Now it's going to be harder to do that. If you roam mid, you are probably going to lose control of the bot wave. That wave is probably going to crash. And so we're going to need to be more deliberate with our roams towards mid. Does it look likely that we are going to achieve something with that roam, or should we just path straight bot and keep the good wave state that we want. And so this is going to incentivize lane dominant or scaling champions a little bit more. The champions that want to roam around a lot, that's going to have a harder time for them to do so. It's not going to be impossible, it's just going to be a little bit harder. It's also worth noting with these changes that your mid laner is going to have a harder time to roam down bot in terms of, ganking or even diving. And so it's going to be a bit more of an isolated 2v2 lane, which favors enchanters and mages. A couple more points that affect bot lane. So minions that are attacking an enemy tower will ignore call for help. So pretty much all this means is that when you are diving, your wave will not hit the enemy when they are responding to the dive. And so it's going to make diving a little bit harder. Mid roaming towards bot is a little bit harder. And turret plates are going to be a little bit tankier as well. And I like the turret plate change, to be honest. It did feel like if the enemy jungle got herald, came down towards bot, got one kill, then the laning phase is just pretty much over. So there are a bunch of things adding up just to extend the laning phase and incentivize laning. In my experience, it hasn't been utterly game-changing. You still can roam. My games in Challenger are still fast-paced. I don't feel like I have to play an Enchanter and be locked into the bot lane. But especially for lower elos, I think this is really something to take note of and to maybe adjust your champ pool so that you can keep up with the times. Unleash teleport change. So this is going to affect us, both mid and top laners. Are going to quite often have teleport, and then it's going to be active at 10 minutes instead of 14 minutes. And so you could get TP flanked now, again, in the laning phase, post 10 minutes. So remember to sweep out your lane between 10 and 14 minutes, and to potentially get some deep wards into the enemy lane bushes so that you can set up your team as well. And we're going to wrap up the patch notes with the Oracle Lens change. So this now has 2 charges. This is just going to take a little bit of getting used to. It's not really a huge buff or a huge nerf by any means. We just want to be a little bit more deliberate with when we press this. We don't want to just randomly press it and then we're going to sweep a big area. We want to have an idea that a ward is around there, or we're sweeping a specific location and we can sweep that area and then potentially get another sweep off. So we might be able to get some more wards swept if we use this item deliberately now. That's going to be it for the item changes. And as always, I'm more than happy to have discussions in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my Patreons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated.